and it suddenly said I was no longer on air. Took me a little while to work that out. So if you can hear me, please type in the chat box again. And if you can see the screen, could you perhaps type in the chat box again? Things are happening. Yes, Sasha? Can anybody hear me or see me? Jess, you can hear. Great to see you on board. Sean, you can hear me. Great. Righto. Well, can you see me? That's the big important question. Great, Sean. Thanks. Okay. Why don't we get going? It seems that people are able to see and hear me now, and once again, apologies. As I say, I was all set up with 30 minutes to go, and suddenly I wasn't live, but I couldn't get the link re-established. Anyway, we're away. Let's do it. So, g'day. I'm Adam Gordon, the Profit Seek Detective. A nickname somebody gave me a few years ago, so I thought that's worthwhile. I'll keep this. And welcome to this Fast Track to Cash webinar on how to enjoy an additional cash boost of $10,000 or more in your bank account within 8 weeks without having to generate more sales. Sounds fun, so let's see what we can do. Now, some of you will participated in webinars before, and you know how to interact, and obviously people have already demonstrated that. If you've got any messages, go to the chat box at the bottom right hand corner, just type your message in, and it'll pop up there. I'll take questions, put questions in at any time. If I can answer them as I'm going, I will do, but I'll try and pick them all up before we finish. So with that, let's get going. So who's this for, this webinar? Well, here's the sort of criteria I look at, and it's about people who find, yes, they can get the jobs, but they don't seem to have much money. They're spending too much time on work, and they can get their sales, but yeah, it's just not working for them. What I try and do is help you measure the right things for you that help you identify profit leaks and close them. That's really, yeah, I suppose it's good detective work, isn't it? Finding the problem, and obviously you need to want to be in front, not to be struggling from a cash point of view. But before we get into the detail, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about myself and my background, and I suppose how I came to be doing what I'm doing now. I started out my business life in the private sector, though I've had a few years in government, mainly sort of in the industrial attraction area. My industrial experience was mainly in manufacturing, in the aerospace industry a long time ago, aluminium boat manufacture, farm machinery, and I've had a little bit of retail experience, less than a couple of years. Particularly in the aerospace game, I did a lot of negotiating, I did a lot of bidding, and I was lucky to be successful in bidding a number of quite profitable contracts with US and British aerospace companies. I dealt with people like Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, Westland Helicopters, and a few others. I've also marketed, I've said marine equipment, boats if you like, in Malaysia, Singapore and Burma. And we sold the Burmese some light patrol boats some time ago now. And I've also marketed unsuccessfully, thank goodness, farm machinery in the Middle East. I don't think I particularly want to be trying to win sales of agricultural machinery in the Middle East at the moment. But I've been running my own business consultancy for 27 years now, and I've concentrated on working with small businesses. That's been what I've really been, I guess, found my calling in, what I'm really interested in, assisting them become more profitable and improve their cash flow. As a bit of an aside, I was a judge for the Telstra Business Awards in Darwin for many years. Now I'm down in northern New South Wales. I chair the local Business Excellence Award Committee and have done for the last few years. You see a lot of good businesses and you learn a lot by looking at the businesses who are successful in such awards. Okay, moving on. So who do I work with? I don't usually work with startups, so I have. I usually work with people who've been in business a few years, and they're usually in Australia or New Zealand, though I have had people overseas. Normally they're looking at turning over at least 650,000, but they're marginally profitable. They're not going to be interested in assistance if they're not worried about their profits and the cash. And they also want to overcome the problem that most people get into when they start to struggle is, well, we've got to put more time in. So we work 6-7 hours a day, and we work 6 or 7 hours a day, 8 or 9 hours a day or more, and they work 6 or 7 days a week. So it's life's a struggle. What are we going to cover today? We're going to have a look at what do I mean by a profit leak, and we're going to then go to the number one problem that prevents you generating the cash you deserve, 3 keys to boosting the cash in your bank account without having to work harder or longer, and 3 common but cash leaking mistakes to avoid. And while I will try and answer questions as we go, I will pick up at the end. We'll have a bit of a Q&A at the end. So let's move on to the first item. What's a profit leak? And the best way I found to illustrate it was actually with a if you like, a personal problem that I had. And I call it my water bill problem. And it was when I lived in Darwin. I lived in Darwin for 25 years. I went up there for 2, stayed 25. Very nice place. My office was right in the middle of that lit area there, Cullen Bay. Very nice place to have an office too. Anyway, this was a problem at home. It was, as I say, a wet season. It was a wet season problem, really. Darwin, as you should probably know, is in the tropics. So we had 2 basic seasons. It was either wet or it was dry. And in the dry, would go 5 or 6 months without any rain at all. So if you had a garden like we did, well, the obvious thing to do is you put in automatic reticulation to keep things green, and in the wet, you turn it all off. You don't need it because everything's lush and green. In Darwin, you build quarterly for your water. I guess in most areas you build quarterly. And if we were billed monthly, I might have picked up this problem earlier. And that, as a hint, if you like, for people in business, this is why you need to look at your accounts and other KPIs on a regular basis, at least on a monthly basis, and not 3 monthly or quarterly, or 6 monthly if some people do. Anyway, I got a wet season bill. When all the reticulation's off and the only water we're using is in the house. The problem was that the bill was double what it should have been. It was a very big ouch. So okay, I got to find this. But you know, there was no leaking taps or running taps, running loos or whatever in the house, so it had to be outside. But how do you find a leak when everything's green? Being the wet season, all very lush and green. In the end, I found it by accident, right? I trod in it. I trod in a very mushy bit of ground. I suppose had I waited, I would have found it when the dry season came round, and I would have a very hard to miss green spot. But finding leaks by accident is just not enough. And that's a problem for business, right? If you don't know you've got a leak, how do you actually plug it? Sometimes, you know, a problem is pretty obvious. If you like, a leaking tap tells you what's going on. You might have a particular line or a particular activity that's obviously costing money, and if you can see it, you'll do something about it. But what about the times when you don't know profits are leaking, and you don't know until you get the quarterly or half yearly or even annual figures? And I have known people not to look at their figures for 6 months, because by then it's too late, right? The profits have leaked, the cash is gone. You know, your accounts really are a reflection of, well, they're a reflection of what has happened in the past. They're not a reflection of what's happening ahead. They might give you some clues. Sure, you can fix the problem, you can plug the leak, but what's gone is gone. Now, question, is your business leaking money? My experience is most businesses have profit leaks in one form or another, draining cash which could be theirs. They just don't know the leaks are there, and if they did, they would have plugged them by now. I guess that's the obvious thing to do. Enjoying the benefits of another $10,000 as I had in my header in your bank account is very simple. All you do is find those profit leaks and plug them. Sounds simple, doesn't it? So, is this you? If your business has profit leaks, you'll be experiencing a bank account short of cash, irate creditors pressing you, long hours at work, no family free time for, I was fishing in there, though I don't go fishing as often as I should. And you'll be stressed. And stress, I find, is one of the biggest things. And one client I had, he was so stressed he couldn't make decisions. And if you like, it all snowballed from there, didn't it? The longer he took to make decisions, the worse the problem got. So, have any of you experienced problems like this? Put a yes or 3 of them or whatever in the chat box. Let's see if anybody has experienced any of those kind of pressures. No one in there? Yes, it just says yes. Okay. Righto. Let's move along then. But picture the reverse of that. If you plug the leaks and get all the extra cash, you're going to have money in the bank. You'll have willing and friendly suppliers, a lifestyle. You get your lifestyle back, and you'll have freed yourself from the stress burden. And that, to my mind, is always really worthwhile, because running a small business is not always easy, but if you can, once you achieve it, and it's certainly achievable, then it changes things dramatically for people. Hello, Trevor, good to see you aboard. And just think about this: if you were able to get that extra money, what difference would it make to you, and how would you use it? Trevor, after 21 years, how would you use it? Any thoughts? Okay. I've got a no yes there too. That yes, definitely. Okay. Let's move on to the second issue, if you like, the number one problem that prevents you generating the cash you deserve. And the number one reason you're probably suffering from profit leaks is you don't know what to look for, where to look, or perhaps even when to look. There's not much point in working hard to generate extra sales if you've got a profit leak. We need to find the leaks and plug them before we move on to the next step. Okay, let me give you a real life example. This is about a bloke called Andrew, and that is his name. He's a tradesman, a boiler maker, and he's a good one. He's able to make, repair, fix a lot of things. They've been in business for quite a few years. So a few years ago, now he did what most people did. Who most people do who are good at what they do. He went into business for himself. Started off with the usual, everything's in the back of the ute, till he got a shed and employees, and they worked pretty hard. The business had and has a good name. The problem at the time was that they weren't making any money. Things were tough and they were getting pretty tense, pretty stressed, if you like. So this is the situation before we got involved, right? And that graph, by the way, is theirs. And let me just explain that, right? So the top line is their sales line for that particular year, and the bottom line is their bank account. Yes, it's trending up, but it was in the red the whole year, and the suppliers are getting on top of them. I did an analysis of some of their jobs. I analysed some job cards, and I found that some jobs were actually very profitable for them, and a lot more, unfortunately, weren't very profitable. And in fact, you see the figure there, the actual profit result could have been, on the sample I had, up to 34% above or below the profit that they were due to make on the price they quoted. Now, hey, to lose 34% on a job is pretty nasty. They needed help, and they asked me to come and have a look at it. So what happened after as a result of this, right? And this is actually 2 years later, and it's not my graph again, it's their graph. And in fact, it was this client that the name and the Profit Leak Detective came from. Because if you look at the graph they've got here, apart from one jump there in around month 5, which is a big sale, the sales pretty well mirrored the sales from 2 years before. They are only gone into the red in one spot, and that was to buy the materials for that very big job. So really, apart from that, the sales performance was much the same as the sales performance a couple of years earlier. The difference was they had money in the bank. They had spare cash in the bank. They were only taking on jobs that made them money, and those jobs were coming in on or ahead of budget. And it really did. Plugging that leak, finding what the problem was, meant thousands in terms of cash surplus going into their bank account. It really made a big difference to them. Now, not every leak, we're going to look at some leaks in a moment, different types of leaks. So not everyone's going to have the same type of thing. For them, it was a particular type of job, and we were able to find it and to do something about it. So just to reiterate, the number one reason why your business is probably suffering from profit leaks is that you don't know what to look, where to look, or perhaps even when to look. And that was what Andrew's problem was. He didn't know where the problem was. He just knew he had a problem. And it's been my experience with so many clients over the years is that they don't really know where to look or what to look for. So I guess that my point I've mentioned a couple of times is generating more sales won't help your cash shortage if those sales are actually leaking profits. So let's move on to having looked at what a profit leak is and giving you an example to illustrate the point that it's not knowing where the problem is. They know they've got a problem, but not knowing where the problem is. Let's move on to 3 keys to boosting the cash in your bank account without having to work harder or longer. And those 3 keys are, the first one is understanding where your sales come from and where your profits come from. As we'll look, that's not always the same thing. Increasing margins through better pricing strategies and improving margins through more accurate cost of sales. Okay. Sales. What do you sell and to whom? Now, it may seem counterintuitive to think of sales causing profit leaks, but in my experience, this is where the most frequent and largest leaks occur, at least in small business. And there are two kinds. They can be actual cash losses, as Andrew was experiencing in the particular type of job that was causing him a problem. And they could be money left on the table where you could have got more and better margins. And we'll look at some examples of that. Now, I guess some of you have heard of the 80-20 rule. It's the Pareto principle. And the 80-20 rule really says that the majority of your sales will come from the minority of your products and services. Now, it won't necessarily be 80-20, it might be 67-33, but yeah, the majority, the key is that the majority of your sales will come from a minority of your products and services. Now, you probably know what they are, but the question is, are those products or services as profitable as they could be? And you can have a situation like this, and we'll look at a real-life example towards the end of this webinar, where, if you like, you have two products and one 30% of sales, but generating 60% of the profits. That can and does happen. What I found is, well, most people will have some sales information, but will they have the profitability information by product group? And equally, and this is always passingly strange to me, but will they know their profits by customer group or market segments? I found that a lot of companies, while they'll know their sales, they'll be able to break their sales down into groups, they won't always be able to break their profitability down into those groups. In other words, they won't measure the profitability of the product groups, they only measure the sales. But equally so, the customers thing is very important. I use something called a customer product matrix to examine the detail and work this out in a bit of detail. And that matrix, and we'll look at an example shortly, but basically I usually put the customer groups, market segments across the top, put the product or service groups down the side, and look at what is being sold, what, if you like, service is being sold to customer group A to B to C, etc., and to see where the strong performers are and where the problems are. But I also actually do two customer product matrices. I do one on sales and I do one on gross profits. Now, all these figures should be obtainable. They should be in your accounts, but it may mean drilling down a bit, and that's usually when it gets a bit harder. You need to set your accounts up to actually give you this information. So I guess my question for you is, do you know which are the useful few, that 80-20 bit, which are the useful few of your products and the useful few of your customers that put the cash in your bank account? 80-20 applies to customers as much as it does to market segments, as it does to your products and services. I had one client who had the Defence Housing Authority as their major customer. I forget, it was, I don't know, 30 or 40% of their turnover came from Defence Housing Authority. But the problem was it was taking 80% of the management time. And that, if you like, is another profit leak. It's not as direct, but if you're spending all your time, 80% of your time, solving problems with one customer, dealing with complaints or whatever, then you're going to have an ongoing problem. Again, chance to just ask you a question, and do you know? I don't ask you to identify them, but do you know in your business what are the most profitable products or services, and who are the most profitable customer groups? Can we have some yeses or nos, please, in the chat box? No thoughts? Okay. Just sort of. Okay. Yeah. It's an interesting exercise, and I find that when I consult with clients, it's one of the first things I do is to try and get a bit of a feel for that, and to see what sort of information they do have to inform their decision-making process. Okay, Trevor thinks so. Okay. Let's look at an example. Now, this is a hypothetical, but as I say, I have seen this type of thing time and time again, but it's a useful hypothetical because it enables me to illustrate a few points. So the car parts business, it's got 4 product lines. It sells engine parts, oil filters, accessories, and audio products. And here are its sales, right? And so what we see is engine parts are the biggest turnover, make the biggest contribution to sales, 36%, and accessories contribute 34%. But what about profitability? So let's look at their percentage contribution to gross profits. And what we see here is that accessories contribute 46% to gross profits and audio 34%. So if you like, go back to that previous graph I put up, 72% of sales come from engine parts and accessories, but 80% of gross profits come from accessories and audio. Engine parts, turning over so much, only contribute 12% to overall gross profits. A lot of sales for not much contribution. Now, yes, I know we need to, whatever business in, we need to be offering a reasonably complete. Yes, I understand, Trevor. I do understand. Yeah. Trevor's saying it's hard to say no when you are their only option. Yes. But you might be able to do something about it. Let's continue on. So using the 80-20 rule and looking at sales and profitability gives us 2 different pictures, but it then helps us make some useful decisions. Drilling down helps us, drilling down to profitability as well as sales helps us make some useful decisions. But then let's look at the customer side of things this time, right? This is the other half, the top part of the matrix, if you like. Who are their customers? So in our hypothetical, they're mechanics, they're individuals, not-for-profit organisations, they're government, and that always other or miscellaneous or whatever. That's the group. So what do sales look like? Okay, we find that mechanics and individuals are the 2 biggest areas, right? They're 160,000 each, so they're 32% of 32% of sales come from mechanics and 32% come from individuals. Profitability is a different story. Because accessories and audio are the most profitable, who buys them? And it's individuals who are buying accessories and audio. So that's a pretty important thing to know, right? Because the issue is here that the majority of your, while the majority of your sales will come from a minority of your products, this profit situation is very, very different. If you look at here, the key to me in this, to me, is that mechanics and individuals are 2 different markets. Mechanics are more than likely a small business. They might have 1 or 2 or 3 employees or whatever. they're a small business. And how do you reach them? Well, you can reach them with everything from personal selling, calling, to letters, to emails. In other words, you can target them very specifically. It's a lot harder to target the individuals, because individuals, the public, they're out there somewhere. We're going to have to advertise, maybe have a website or whatever. But we need a different message and a different media to reach those customers. Now, if we're looking to get that cash, if things at times are difficult, now I'm not saying don't sell engine parts to mechanics, as they probably need them, but if we're looking to recover our position and improve things, to my mind, it makes sense to concentrate on the areas that are and the markets that are most profitable for us. So, as I say, concentrating on sales to mechanics is clearly a profit leak, and it's made worse by untargeted marketing messages. One message doesn't fit all. You can't have one message to cover all types of customers. They do need a different message, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, so what should the small business owner do? If you like, they're averaging monthly sales of, I rounded these figures, 41,700. The average monthly GP is 13,750. If they ditched engine parts and oil filters and just concentrated on accessories and audio and were able to achieve the same level of sales, they'd lose 2,700 in GP, but they'd gain 11,000. Plug the profit leak, get an extra 8,350. Okay, they're figures in a hypothetical situation, but I'm sure you can see the point that if we need to fix things, we need to work on the things that we're good at, that make us the most money, than the things that are not likely to make a big change in the short term. Okay, let's look at the second element in this segment, in these three keys, and that is increasing gross profit margins. Okay. One of the points that always seems to me that, people like to discount to get extra, get extra sales. But remember, as a small business owner, you don't have the opportunity to increase profits and cash by significantly increasing sales through low margins. We're not a Woolies or a Coles or a discount chain. We can't. You have to increase the profit from sales or in sales, rather than try and just sell a hell of a lot more. We're in small business. We don't have that volume of sales to get the type of things that the Woolies can do. So let's look at some of the options with pricing. Can you increase your margin? Now, what are the options? If you're in a commodity market where price is the only thing you can use to differentiate your product, there's got to be opportunities for adding value and increasing prices. My old boss in the farm machinery manufacturing industry always used to growl, they can always stand a price rise. And he was right. We had a good product, and we could always charge a bit more because had a good product. So that you should ask, can you differentiate your product? In a commodity market, there's essentially no difference between product A and product B being offered by different companies. If you don't differentiate, essentially you die, because you're competing on price, and the only thing that can happen when you compete on price is those prices will go down. There'll always be someone who will undercut you. So what about increasing sales incrementally? Now, one of the benefits of small increases in sales is that you're unlikely to lose a customer because you've gone up 1 or 2 or 3 or 4%. And the benefit of that is that 1 or 2 or 3, 4% goes straight through to the bottom line, right? Because your costs are no different. You've increased your price just a bit. And yeah, as I say, there's no extra cost, so it goes straight through to the bottom line. One of the things I always recommend to people is, if you have rising costs, please don't wait months and months and months to increase your prices, because when you do, you're going to have to make a bigger increase in price, and that can have problems. But having said that, price is a positioner. Always has been, right? If you have something that you're discounting or whatever, it doesn't just squeeze your margins, but it's also got a tendency to sort of scream cheap, cheap, cheap. And cheap usually means, in people's mind, poor quality, and they don't like buying poor quality. On the other hand, if you significantly change your price, then you're going to reposition yourself in the market. Now, you can't have a significant price increase without changing something, and we'll talk about values and benefits in a moment. But it can be done, and I've seen people do it, really change how they're perceived in the marketplace by significantly increasing their price, but also offering a good product or service. In the end, well, you need to learn the strategies for increasing prices. We're going to touch on a couple of things today, but it's a separate subject entirely. How to increase your price and keep your customers. The bottom line is, do you want to increase the volume of sales or the value of sales? In the end, it's the volume of gross profit you achieve, not the volume of sales you achieve, that determines your profitability. One of the biggest fallacies in business is that a product's price should be based on its costs. It's a real problem. The problem with that approach is that it mistakenly assumes, and I've seen lots of people do this, it assumes that customers base their willingness to pay on how much it costs you to produce or buy it. That pricing impacts your margins is a statement of the obvious, and the reaction of most people, and again, I've seen this over the last 27 years, they worry that if they increase their prices, they will lose sales. Now, the key question there is whether the gross profits of those lost sales would have realised are greater or less than the additional gross profits they made from the sales they kept at the higher price. There's a bloke, a copywriter, an advertising writer, if you like, called Drayton Bird over in the UK, who often tells a story of a printer who was a client of his. Drayton rages about people discounting. And this bloke wrote to him one day, and I've got a copy of the thing that he wrote, and said something along the lines of, he got sick of the 7-day-a-week thing and never having any money, so he tripled his prices. And he said overnight he lost 70% of his customers, and within 3 months he was making more money than he'd ever had. He got rid of all the penny pinching, complaining customers who took up too much time and weren't generating any real value for him. The problem is that, too many people have simplistic pricing processes. It's cost plus 10% or whatever. You shouldn't base you've got to take things into your costs into account, and I'll look at that in a sec. But too many businesses don't look at the customer's perceptions of value. If the price is lower than the customer's perceived value, then sure, sales may be brisk, but you're leaving money on the table, aren't you? And not maximising your profit. And if you can't identify your most profitable products or services or your most profitable customers, then you won't really understand what their perception of value is. Underpricing is, to my mind, is a surprisingly common source of profit leaks. New businesses always don't charge enough, and many existing businesses don't. And the reason is that fear that I alluded to earlier. They fear they'll lose sales if their prices are higher than their competitors. So their strategy is to sell their products and services based on price alone, and look, that doesn't work, as I say, cheap, and it leads to a spiral down. But I've found, and I've done this asked this question in workshops and things, if you ask a small business why they lost a particular job that they might have tendered for or quoted for or whatever, they will tell you that the competition was cheaper, and they'll complain about them undercutting and discounting and all that sort of stuff. But what do they say when they win a major job? Again, be a tender, quote, or whatever. Do you think they say they won it by having the cheapest price? Or will they talk about the superior quality of their product, their service, their relationship they've developed with the client, the sheer value of their offering? I really have had somebody tell me they won something on price and price alone. Pricing needs to be well thought through. It does need to be realistic, and it needs to be appealing enough to prospective customers. But simply charging a little less than your competitors is not actually a strategy. As I say, it leads to perceptions of you being cheap. It leads you to be seen just as a commodity. You've got to differentiate or die, as I said earlier. What we do need to understand is value. Perceived value is the key. You need to understand the concept of value from the customer's perspective to be able to put yourself in your customer's shoes. And I mean your best customer shoes, not your worst customers. Those top customers, those ideal clients, ideal customers, if you can identify them and what is value to them, then you can start to work out the price. See, value only exists in the mind of the customer, and that means the individual customer. And what's value to one may not be of value to another. And that value comes from the benefits, little equation there, value equals benefits minus price. The benefits that your product or services provides to that customer. What's it doing for them? What problem is it solving for them? How does it make them feel? You need to, and it's more than the features. You know what the features are. You have a widget that spins at 3,000 revs a minute or whatever. The question when people list the features of their product or service is to ask the question, so what? So it spins at 3,000 revs per minute. What does that do for the customer? What's the effect of that? Profit is value in the customer's eyes. And you can increase your prices when you understand that what that value is to that customer. If you further increase the benefits, if you add to the benefits with different bells and whistles or whatever to your product, extend the guarantee, whatever. If you add to the benefits, the more benefits you add, the higher the price you can charge. So you can end up with a range of, if you like, a basic product that has various added values at different prices. Smart businesses don't just do a blanket price increase. We're going to increase all prices by 5% next week. There's more to it than that. In the strategy, you need to look at those customers in the different market segments and what's value to those in the different market segments. So it means having a proper marketing strategy that lets you build on the value, on the benefits that you provide, and clearly is establishing that value in the customer's eyes. And that, again, subject for a whole separate webinar to get in and go into that. But I guess the final point on this thing is that price is only an issue when value remains a mystery. Let's look at the third key in this section, improving margins through having a more accurate cost of sales. Now, I've said you shouldn't base your price on costs and costs alone. But my starting point in pricing is always costs. Unless you know and understand your costs, you can't really determine what your margin is. That doesn't mean basing your price on the cost, but not knowing your costs mean that you've got no control over your profit. I sometimes use the metaphor that it's a little like that childhood game of pinning the tail on the donkey. First, you have to know where the ass's arse is if you're going to succeed in that little exercise. Remember that, and we're going to talk a bit about this, your costs have got two different elements, right? One's the variable costs associated with what you sell on a particular job, and the other is the fixed cost of your overheads. So you need to recover all the variable costs associated with each sale, as well as try and reduce them. Now, I know that sounds a bit contradictory, increase and reduce, so let's just get into that in a bit more detail. What do I mean by improving your cost of sales, right? You've got to know where they are to do it, and then you need to recover all those costs, all the variable costs, right? As well as try and reduce them. Margins not just the result of prices. We looked at, can we increase the price? You have to understand these variable costs that, and how recovering those will improve margins. Variable costs, and I'm sure most of you know that, they're direct costs. They're those costs which you wouldn't incur if you didn't make the sale. They're directly attributable to the sale, to the goods you sell or the services you provide, the materials and labour, whatever that goes into servicing things. If the customer who incurred those costs doesn't pay them, then either they must be spread over all the other customers, or you're going to take them out of your profits. Yes, they will increase the cost of sales, but they will, if they're correctly attributed to the particular job, then they will reduce the overheads and admins that you've got to recover across all sales. And I'll touch on that in a bit more. So yeah, it will improve your margins. And the point I made is the customer who incurred the cost doesn't pay all the costs, then either all the customers must pay those, or you take them out of your profits, as I was saying. Okay. Let's look at, for those of you who charge out labour, whether it be for professional services or repair and maintenance, or making things, whatever, right? One of the things that you need to ensure is that the proper times are recorded on the job cards or however you record it in your business. I've seen businesses where the management allows the staff to estimate their time they spend on each job at the end of the day. Look, those sort of job cards are really accurate, and inaccurate job cards or inaccurate recording, if you like, leads to a lot of problems, right? If you don't record enough hours or enough time on a job, then you're not going to recover the actual cost incurred. If you have too many hours on there and the customer objects, you're going to can either get a reputation for being expensive, or you're going to have to write down the hours onto to something that's reasonable, and that is really something you can't charge to another customer. You've had to write them down. And yeah, it's poor information, and poor information will lead to poor decision making, because you don't really know what was going on, whether they're the real costs that you're testing and checking are the right costs. I always find this is important, because if you want to improve your business, you need accurate information. You need to know what's going on, what's making money, and what's not making money. Okay, let me give you some other sort of examples I've come across over the years. Handling. Here's a real life example, a client who repaired small engines like ride-on mowers, generators and things like that. They would usually come into the workshop by truck. Someone would, usually the bloke who does the repairs, he'd come out, take it off the truck, work on it and load it back when he's finished the job. I asked the owner, did he record that time? And he said, no, but look, between loading and unloading, it's probably only 15 minutes. That's 15 minutes not recovered. But just think about it. If that person did 4 jobs a day, say, that's an hour's unrecovered cost each day for 5 days a week. If he was charging, say, $100 an hour, that's $500 a week not recovered, for which he's paying wages and on costs. Not a sustainable position. Shop floor consumables, things like most repair and jobbing shops and things like that, workshops, garages incur a range of consumables on a daily basis. They might have cleaning rags, nuts and bolts, cleaning aids and things like that. In a vet, I've got some vet clients, they may be gloves and sterilising items and things like that. If you don't recover those consumables directly against the job, they become an overhead cost, and that must be recovered out of the fixed expenses, thereby reducing your net profit. Now, it's hard to accurately record some nuts and bolts going into a job, and with the way people usually do it is just putting in a percentage on the invoice. That percentage may be anywhere between 1% and 3%. But that's the best way to get that back. And again, that adds up over time. Or freight. Freight may be incurred on incoming raw materials, parts, or items for sale. If you're a wholesaler or a retailer, there'll be freight in. There also can be incurred in delivery of products or goods back to customers. Now, usually I find that delivery to the customer is charged, but very often I find in a company's accounts that freight in is put into overheads. And again, surely those costs should be attributed to the client who's ultimately incurring that cost. And it might be convenient and easy just to leave it in the overheads, but again, you don't accurately know what's going on, and you're not accurately recovering the real costs of that particular job. Okay, let's move on. Let's look at reducing the cost of sales, and we've talked about, if you like, putting it up by making sure we accurately record those costs of sales. But how can we reduce the cost of sales? Well, first thing is better purchasing. How regularly do you check that your suppliers are giving you the best prices? How long is it since you've tested by seeking quotations from other suppliers or from a different range of sources? Are there alternatives out there that you haven't tested for a while? The processes. People, can you hear me? I just had an internet connection fall out. Can you hear me, folks? Hello, folks. Are you there? I don't know whether... Hello? God, I don't want to... Hello. Okay, you can hear me? Great, Jess. Sean, thank you. Let's get the show back on the road. It was a bit embarrassing. It's never happened to me in a webinar before that the internet just dropped out. Anyway, it came back. So let's keep going. Let's see where it was. Okay, so I was talking about improving the process. I started to give you an example of working with the Power and Water Authority in Darwin. At one stage, they're looking at the problem of when a builder builds a new house, it's got to be electrified. So that's up to the Power and Water Authority. The process was taking 30 days and had 15 steps in it. We mapped out the steps like in my little process map here. They were able to reduce the number of steps down to 8 from 15, and the time from 30 days to 1 day, just by reviewing the process. Right now, it would obviously significantly decrease their costs and keep the customers much happier. And the final thing that can do is can you eliminate mistakes? Can you eliminate mistakes? Mistakes take up time and money, right? Customers get dissatisfied, but you've also got to go and fix it. And so there's two costs. There's the cost of fixing it, the time and money it takes to fix the problem, materials, etc. But there's also the opportunity cost of you could have been doing something else that made some more money. You could have sold something else, provided another service, whatever. So there's two costs from making mistakes: the cost of fixing it and the opportunity cost of the lost sale. Okay, let's move along. I hope we don't have another dropout. In summary, working on your gross profit margin may offer... Tom, you can't hear or see. Tom says he can't hear or see. Sean's okay. Sasha's okay. Sean is my presentation back. Sean says you're back to Tom. You're right now. Okay. Okay. Back again. Okay. Good, Tom. So I was saying, in summary, working on your gross profit margin may offer greater returns for less efforts than chasing increased sales. Always a problem. And that it'll almost always deliver more cash to you through better margins. So work on that gross profit margin. Okay, moving right along. So in summary, the three keys are understanding where your sales come from, but also understanding where your profits come from, both from a product or service point of view and from your customer or market segments. Increasing margins through better pricing strategies. And we can almost always, all of us, benefit through that. But also improving the margins through more accurate cost of sales. Okay. Let's move on to the final element, and that is 3 common but cash leaking mistakes to avoid. And this is fairly brief. And I'll put them up and then we'll go through them. The first is ignoring the problem and hoping it'll solve itself, that it'll go away. The second one is taking action, but trying to do it yourself. And the third one is taking action, but the wrong action. Okay, the first one, and we're all guilty of this at times. That we ignore the problem and hope it'll go away, hope it'll solve itself. You know, don't worry, be happy. But what's the cost of doing nothing? The leaks are going to continue. No change, no gain, just more pain. You're leaving money on the table, or you continue to leak cash from your business when it actually should be in your bank account. Then there's taking action. You're saying, like, yeah, you go to a webinar, you go to a workshop or seminar or something, you get some great ideas, and you say to yourself, I can do this, I'm going to do this, get back home, get out, we're going to get to work. And then you get busy, chaos intervenes, a problem arises, and you just don't actually implement that great idea that you picked up. So the leaks continue, as does the pain. And then finally, it's the mistakes we make mistakes when we try and do things ourselves. And I don't know where I came across that little saying, but it's kind of like the person who's not a lawyer trying to represent himself in court. He is a fool for a client. Taking action, but the wrong action is a mistake. You know, it'd be like me trying to solve a plumbing problem with my Darwin water bill problem. Yes, I could find the problem by treading in it, but I needed a plumber to come and fix it. Okay, let me give you another example. Again, this is a real life example. Tip Top Products, not its real name, obviously. Let me just tell you a little bit about them. You know, they're turning over, or we're turning over 2.4 million. Had a GP of 254,000, so their gross profit margin was 10.5%, net profit margin 4.7. Yeah, not too bad. Perhaps it could be better, you think. So they weren't struggling, but they thought they should be doing better, and they didn't know why. They had 2 divisions. There was Division 1, let's just call them Division 1. Tom says he's cutting in and out, or I'm cutting in and out. Tom, I've only got a few minutes to go, so I'll finish it, but we can reschedule another one for people who'd like to come back. Okay, there's about 4 or 5 slides. So Division 1 had a gross profit margin of 21%, so pretty good. But they were declining as a proportion of sales for the company. Division 2 was increasing in sales, and Yes, Trevor's okay, Jess is okay, she's an Alice. Tom, it might be that ADSL1 that you have. Okay, so let me, the issue, what we found was, and the issue was that while they could measure they recorded the sales for Division 1 and Division 2, the cost of sales was amalgamated into one cost of sales, showing them their gross profit of 254,000. We sat down with them and allocated their cost of sales between Division 1 and Division 2, and that's where it became apparent what the problem was. For Division 2, their cost of sales was actually greater than sales, so that every sale they made, or overall, making a sale was costing them money. They were losing money. The more they sold, the more they lost. Obviously, a real problem, and it just illustrates again. They didn't know. All they knew was that they weren't doing as well as they thought they should be. They didn't actually know where the problem was. Now, as you can see, it's pretty obvious once you do a bit of drilling down and get some figures, it's pretty obvious where the problem was. Division 1 was very profitable, or pretty profitable, not bad, but it was hiding the problems in Division 2. Now, they obviously had to make a strategic decision. I won't tell you which one they made it, but it wasn't the one we recommended. But I have to say they're still around, they're still operating. I checked on them recently. So yeah, once you've got the information though, then you've got a basis for making good decisions. Okay, so would I fix my plumbing problems? I'd no sooner do that than represent myself in court, and the results might be pretty expensive. We'll get into one of okay. So in summary, the 3 common but costly mistakes: ignoring the problem and hoping it'll solve itself, taking action and trying to do it yourself, or taking the wrong action. So let's look at what we've covered. We had a look at what is a profit leak. It's something that's costing you cash, that's costing you money, but you don't know that it's there. We looked at the number 1 problem that prevents you generating the cash you deserve, and really that was, again, not knowing what the problem, not knowing where to look, when to look, or what to look for. We looked at 3 keys to boosting the cash in your bank account: knowing where your sales and profits come from, knowing, being able to increase your prices, increase your margins, and improving your margins by reducing your cost of sales. And finally, we just quickly looked at 3 common but cash leaking mistakes to avoid. So thank you. My apologies for the problems we had. The first one was pilot error in the late start. The second one, just a few minutes ago, was I guess a poor internet connection bringing on the NBN, but I think it could be a while. Don't let the profit leaks run away with your cash like a thief in the night. What I'd like to see is if you've got any questions, but before I do that, I'd like to make an offer. And my offer is, it's a 45-minute conversation on phone, or Skype, or I use Zoom, in which I sit down and have a chat to you about the potential to earn an additional $10,000 per month. And if I can identify the top 3 areas to get started on, I'll tell you. If I can't help, I'll recommend other resources. Now, there's no charge for this. It's if you like, it's my gift to you. You're all people who are on my list. So yeah, if you'd like to have a chat at some stage, and I think I've got room for about 5 next week, and then a couple the week after. If you go to this URL, and I'll just put it up in the can I put this in the chat box? Oops, no. You'll get the URL. If you take a look at that URL, go to our website, or okay, Trevor. Go to the website. There's a fast track to cash consult, or Trev, just send me an email and we'll fix up a time. Anybody else, when you clock out, the this URL should pop out, but you might want to take a quick note of it now. Can I quickly type it into here? Too many W's there. /fast. Oops, there's a typo there. That should be fast track to cash consult. I won't try and copy it again. Fast track to cash consult. Okay. And if you've got any questions, I'll hang around. But if you are ready to go, thank you very much for staying with me, and we'll catch up at some stage. Patricia, yes, thanks very much. Tom, what was a long time ago? Okay, Sasha, thanks very much. Look forward to hearing from you. I'll hang on for a few more minutes if anybody else. Okay, Sean, glad you found it useful. It's we could all do with a little bit of work at our businesses at times, and sometimes it's just the outside view. Sometimes it's just getting some information. But yeah, good luck. Okay, well, look, if no further questions, I'll say goodbye and thank you very much for attending. See you later.